Hey, y'all, I just dropped this in class, but we'll go ahead and take a quick break and start at 10:15. All right, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want to circle back on is the project check-in schedule. So I saw Jameson G posted that you couldn't find a open time slot. Jameson, is that still the case for you and your partner?
I can't say for my partner, but Alex can chime in. But when I go to that page in particular, that's just what by default it shows up as. There's no current slots open.
Was anyone else not able to find an open slot? Okay, cool. So Jameson, I am going to put you down for the 1:30 slot. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to read through what I see on my end for everybody's times and just double check that that's okay. Okay, so on 1 o'clock for this afternoon, I have Jen, Gunnar, and Joe, and Susie and Lawrence. At 1:30, I have Mark and I'm assuming Mark's partner. I don't know who that is. And then Emmy and Sid. So those are our two 130s. 2, we have Molly and Jermaine and Richard and Zach Green. And then at 2:30, we have Regina and Regina's partner, I'm assuming, and then Noah and Zach T. So can I get some head nods, everybody? Did that sound like your time that you signed up for? Cool. And then on Tuesday, so tomorrow afternoon, I have at 1 o'clock Kevin and Lee, and then Joe, Ray, and Aaliyah. At 1:30, I have Caleb, and I'm assuming Caleb's partner. And then I have at 2, Jack and Joanna and Alex and Dee. Okay, cool. So it seems like the one we have 1:30 open. So Jameson, I think that would be your time. So it's not showing up as available right now, but that's going to be your time.
Today?
And I'm going to make a reminder for myself to just get that officially. See if we can get that done through OneSub.
Sorry, Brian, did you say today or tomorrow? 1:30.
To this afternoon when I've got some time.
Thank you.
Cool. So thank you all for bearing with us. We're trying to get a little more sophisticated on this scheduling end. There are going to be some growing pains with going through this system, but hopefully we've kind of got it all nailed down, and it's much easier for you all to just go in and sign up. Cool. So thank you for working through that with me. I do want to make some space here for any wrap up from the forms, or sorry, from the REST class. Jameson did have to run to another meeting, but I'm happy to go a little bit longer here if there are any other leftover questions. And while you're thinking about that, I'll just kind of say that that last class that Jameson was teaching on REST and routes, that's very much connected to what we're going to be talking about today with forms. So the way you can think about it is the REST side is all about the routes and routing requests. Forms are all about generating those requests. So we just went through, oh, a post request to /dogs would create a dog. Okay, but how does that post request get made? Most of the requests are going to be made through forms. So that's kind of the connection for you all. So I do want to make sure we're good on the forms content. Caleb.
Yes, hello. There was mention of namespace. Is that something we should really look into, or is that just going to be something that we should circle back around on?
I think it would be nice to look into if you have time. The concept of namespacing will come up in the next project. We might not necessarily refer to it as namespacing, kind of like how we've been having you all build RESTful routes, but we haven't really talked about RESTful routes yet. We'll do the same thing with the next project. We'll have you build namespace routes, and then we'll circle back and really talk about that. The specific class is called Advanced Routing, which is going to happen in week 4. So we'll get there eventually. If you have time to look at that namespacing content, that'd be great, but it's not crucial. I would say right now, really want you all to know those RESTful routes. And I think that being able to that diagram that Jameson just had you all work through, being able to do that by hand from memory as quick as possible, that is a skill that I want you to have by the end of the month.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions from REST? All right, let's go ahead and talk about forms a little bit. And I'm going to start with some discussion questions. So let me share my screen here. And we're going to be working through this lesson plan mostly. Actually, before I do this, let me stop my share real quick. Can I get just by like a head nod or a head shake if you watched the forms video that was linked as homework? Cool. So it seems like most people, maybe you didn't quite get to it. I think that was one that maybe I didn't explicitly mention. But if you haven't watched it, you can circle back and watch it after this class. That's fine. It's on the calendar in week 1 on Friday afternoon. So we put it as 5 to 6 as homework. And it's just on that set list playlist that we made for you all. So make sure that you watch that if you haven't watched that lesson. So now that I've got that, let's go back to Chrome here. So that video really covers all of the code portions of this lesson. So everything we did here, you can see Jameson and I working through that. So we're going to be looking, we're going to be digging into this lesson. I would recommend that you pull open this lesson. So if you go to our forums calendar event, it should be linked right here. And so we're going to start off with these discussion questions. So what this discussion is going to have you do is it's going to have you look back at Task Manager like you've been doing. And we're going to discuss what a user needs to do to create a task, how many HTTP requests are sent, and what steps cause the HTTP request to be sent. So I'm going to put you into some breakout rooms. If you finish talking about these, feel free to move on to the discussion questions part 2. We'll get there eventually. But for now, I want to focus in on discussion questions part 1. All right, so I've got some breakout rooms. Any questions on what I'm asking you to do before I send you off? I'm gonna give you 5 minutes for this first discussion. All right, good luck.
Hey, Brian. Somehow, I think I might have pressed a button on accident while I was in the screen. Oh,
Yeah, if you hit enter when the prompt pops up to leave your breakout room, it'll just remove you from
yeah.
your breakout room.
Oh, okay.
We thought
We
that's what
also-
had happened.
Yeah. I
Mark
like,
was
"What?"
saying that he liked something of yours,
I-
and then you.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know if it was me or you. Okay. Whoops.
Yeah, I was like in another thing doing stuff, and then it just kind of, yeah. Oh.
Classic Zoom. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So let's go ahead and talk through these questions. So what are all the steps that a user needs to follow to create a task? I'd love to get some volunteers, or I could do some random volunteers as well. So raise your hand. Lawrence, thank you.
A user has to go to the tasks page. Then they have to click the new task button. Then they fill out their task form. Then they submit that task form. And then that is all the user has to do.
Yep. So just to really like demonstrate that, I'll run my Rails server and I'll do exactly what you just said. I might need to set up my database, but we'll see. So I'll go to, you said go to the task page, right?
Mhm.
And then should I have a new task button?
Maybe that's different than,
Astfaz. That first link.
I think that's a task.
Mhm.
Okay.
Interesting.
So I don't have this link, Lawrence. What do I need to do next?
So
What
we have
would
to
that
get to
link do?
tasks new. So go to tasks/new.
Yep. So I'll just type that directly in my browser.
And then, yeah.
There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, so on to this next question. How many HTTP requests are sent during those steps? Can I get another volunteer? Richard?
So it looks like that there was 3, but it seems like minimum you'd have to have 2. To go to the new
Okay.
page, that's 1. And then clicking the submit button, that would be 2. For 3, it'd be like you go to the, like all the tasks, that's 1. Then clicking like a new, there would be a like add task that will navigate to tasks new to give you the form. And then you click the submit button for the 3rd.
Right, excellent. So I would go to one of them, which is just me hitting enter right now, getting the form, and then is one HTTP request. Number 2, filling out the form and clicking submit. That's a second one. Great job, Richard. Perfect. Jen, do you have anything to add?
I have a question. So when you submit the new task and it redirects back to the index page, the redirect does not count as an HTTP request, or does it? I guess
So
is
it
my
actually does.
okay.
That's a great point. Yep. So I will want to talk about this like a little bit later in the mod, but for now, I think this would be a fun thing for us to do. So there is the one HTTP request that gets the form. So we'll go to /new here. There is another HTTP request to submit the form. But as Jen is saying, under the hood, in order to redirect us back to this page, if I go over to my code and open up my controller, after I create, there's this special redirect to command that actually triggers a 3rd HTTP request. Something that I will show you right now is if you open up these developer tools and you go to network, you can see there's this little like recording thing here. I'm just gonna hit clear just so we can see none of these HTTP requests coming through. So the network tab, this is really nice for viewing these HTTP requests. So let's do this again. Go to /new. And we can see a bunch of other stuff here. This is all, I wonder if I could actually take out, could I just go to doc? Yeah, let's just do doc. All the other ones, these were like, this is like your styling and some other style sheets. You can see like CSS, application, blah, 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 .css. So I'm just gonna click doc to hide some of those. So we went to /new, we'll fill out the form. And then it was really quick, but our /new went away. And we actually got 2 requests being sent here. So one of them is a 302 request, which is a special type of request, which is a redirect request. That redirect request caused us to then view our task index. So this 200 OK to /tasks, this is actually viewing the task index. So I would say that's some nice like bonus information. Right now, what I really want you to recognize is that viewing the form, going to /new and submitting it, those are each your individual, those are individual HTTP requests. And I think we covered this third question. So what steps cause that request to be sent? The first one is when I type the address into my bar to go to the new form, once I hit enter, that sends the request. And then the other one is once I click the submit button, that sends the request. Awesome. Any other questions about this section? Y'all did a great job with that. All right. Can I get maybe just by some head nods if you got into the part 2 discussion questions? So not everybody got in there. Cool. I'm going to give you all, I'm going to put you back into your breakout rooms and I'm going to give you 7 more minutes to talk through this. So you might have to go kind of quick through this. So if I'm giving you, I want you to take 7 minutes to talk through these parts of your form. So if I go back over to my, my task manager here and I go to my view, so app views task new, essentially I want to give you 7 minutes to talk through this form HTML that you wrote. So you might have to go kind of quick, but try to get through all of these pieces here. All right, back into your breakout rooms. All right, welcome back, everybody. So what I had you do in that last breakout conversation was to discuss some HTML. And whenever I am analyzing the visual components of my application, I almost always want to do that using the local dev server and these Chrome developer tools. So I do want to model that for you all. So I'm running my local server down here. I've got my form HTML, but whenever I'm writing code in my view, this is the view, it's very visual. So I always want to get my eyes on it. So I'm going to go over here and I can see my form and I can specifically look at the elements tab and look at all of this HTML that the user is actually seeing. So there is some translation between the code that you write in your view and the actual HTML that is generated. And that's kind of what I'm having you all discuss. So can I get some volunteers? What does the form element do? Lawrence?
The form element basically is telling it that you're about to create a form, and it holds all of the parts of that. I don't know if you want me to go over the bits in that since they're the next two questions.
No, I think you're good. That was exactly right. So that the form element is essentially creating the form and it holds all of the other elements. If I go back over to my dev server and I look at this form element here, I can expand and collapse it. And if I just highlight it, you can see that it corresponds to, it has that blue box around the form itself. So this form element is essentially a container for all the other parts of the form. Let's talk about the action attribute of the form element. Can anyone talk about that? So I can see it right here, action/tasks. What does that do? Noah?
I believe that's giving you a route. It looks like that's the route of where this action goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the route, but I would say more specifically, it's part of the route. Because remember, for a route, there's two key parts of the route, the verb and the path. So Noah, could you expand on that? Which part of the route is this action?
So it is not the verb, it's the path. I believe the verb is yet to come.
Yep, you've got it. Speaking of which, let's talk about the method attribute. Can I get another volunteer? What does the method attribute do? Molly?
Defines the verb.
Exactly. Yep. So together, the action and the method create that route, the verb path combo, where this form is going to submit to. I'll throw in a bonus question here. Can anybody connect this back to the REST class? When we're looking at this, the route that this form is submitting to. Maybe my question is this RESTful? And why or why not? Lawrence, I really appreciate your hand up. Can I hear from someone who I haven't heard from this morning? Aaliyah.
I think, yes, it's RESTful because the path is just directly to a resource. Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the path contains the resource. What about the verb side of it? Does that match up with what you would remember? So this form is for creating a task. Does this method align with that?
Yes. Sorry, I'm not sure
Yes.
I fully understand.
No, you've got it. You've got it. So kind of what I'm getting at is this this post to /task. If I know anything about RESTful routing, post is a create, /tasks is identifying my resource. So this should mean that this form should mean that I'm creating a task, which is indeed what we're using it for. Regina?
Does the method there tell this form, I guess, does it talk to your routes at all, I guess?
No. Yeah, so that's a really good point. Don't think of this as connected directly to my routes. There is something in between the two that connects them, and that is the HTTP request. So the process, I think for a lot of students initially, it can seem like, okay, well, this is a post to /tasks, so that goes directly to my routes file for this post to /tasks. And it's not like they're connected directly. The way it works is when a user clicks submit, it creates a new HTTP request. So if you think back to the how the web works class, that would be like the sending the letter. So you click submit, a new request with that verb and path combo gets sent. So the analogy is you're creating a new letter and you're mailing it to the postal system. That is then received by our routes file. So then our routes file receives that request and says, okay, how do I route that request? So the connection between the form and the routes is the HTTP request in between. The HTTP request is kind of carrying along the information.
Okay,
Joe?
thank you.
You're welcome.
So if I'm understanding correctly, because this was kind of catching me up the other day with the project. So then that HTTP request gets received and it knows to look at posts and then /tasks, which then sends it to the create method. Am I correct in how I'm thinking about that?
You've got it. Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. So these action and these method attributes of the form, very, very important because that directly connects to our RESTful routes and HTTP requests and really everything that we've been talking about this month. Let's talk about the input elements. Could I get a volunteer? What do the input elements do? Jameson?
They provide a way for a user to input information in some kind of specific format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I highlight over these input elements in my view, notice that these dev tools, notice the first one, I don't see anything, but then the other ones line up with what Jameson is saying. This first one is that text box where the user can input something. The second one is the text area. So this is something interesting here. This input is a type of hidden. So a hidden element you can't necessarily see. I started talking about this a little bit, but what does the type attribute do for an input? Alex?
Doesn't it like it tells you what it's going to show up as and what you can do with it? Like the text one with all the top one with all the random letters is different than the text area or right? I think so.
Yep. No, you got it.
Okay. Yeah. Versus like buttons and drop down menus and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got it. It really just determines how it appears visually. So this text area, and I can like expand it and do all this stuff. This is the behavior of a text area versus a text field, not as big, just kind of like a single static box here. So we just talked about the text area a little bit, and this one's a tricky one, but I'm curious what you all talked about. What does form authenticity token do? So this is one where I might want to look back at my view here, because I can see here I can see this ERB tag in here, which is calling form authenticity token. And then in the view, I can see an actual long string value pop up over here. So what do you think that does? Let's go to Alex.
So it creates like the authenticity token and it stores it in the user session and then it compares the two, I think, when you submit the form.
Great. I just want to hear a couple other thoughts. Let's go to Jen.
Is it kind of like a password that's generated from your computer to make sure that it's coming from the right place so that there's no hacking.
Yeah, interesting. Let's go to Richard.
It helps to protect against cross-site request forgery attacks, just so that the server knows that this is the actual user sending the request and not an attacker.
Noah, what do you think?
I actually just have a question about the authenticity token. When you use that Rails kind of sugared syntax to set up a form, is the authenticity token included, or do you need to add that?
It is included. Yeah. So everything that you all said is very accurate. So this does protect against cross-site request forgeries, which we're not going to talk too much about. It's essentially a security feature to make sure that someone is using this form and not submitting a forged request. So for example, I can't go to the command line and just type in some code in here to send a request and kind of go outside the normal means of submitting information. The normal means being submitting this form. Yeah, so you all did a great job describing this. We don't need to talk too much about this because, as Noah just pointed out, this is handled for us when we use our form with view helper. So that's what we're going to get into next. Let's go ahead and take a palm and we'll come back at 11:02. So start back at 11:02. All right, it's 11:02. I'm going to get started. So where we left off, we were talking about these different parts of a form. And if I go back over to Task Manager here, I can see what we had you all do in Task Manager, which is you built this raw HTML form. The only thing that we really included in here that was not valid HTML was this form authenticity token. So this is using an ERB tag to call this method to generate that unique value. So that's the only part of this that was not pure HTML. So the idea here is that we want you to build an HTML form by hand at least once so that you kind of know what should be in an HTML form. But as with a lot of things in Rails, we are not going to do it that longhand format every time. So it's really important that you do it once to understand, okay, every form has this form elements, and the input elements inside generate the actual visuals that the user can type into. We've got a submit button, we've got an action and a method. That's all really important stuff to know. The type of the input determines how it is rendered to the user. All that's very important to know. What we're going to rely on is we're going to rely on view helpers to create this for us. So let me, yeah, Natia.
So in terms of like view helpers versus an HTML form, if you just want to make HTML forms, is that like a bad thing? And if so, why?
Yeah, so let's talk about it. So I just switched my desktops a little bit so that I can now look at the setlist app that we've been building. So this is the setlist form that Jameson and I built together in that video. So yeah, let's talk about what are the advantages of using this version of the form, which is what we want you all to do. So what this version of the form is doing is it's using this form with view helper to create the forms for you. A big reason we would do this is notice that we don't have to deal with the authenticity token. So that's one thing right off of the bat. Every form in Rails that you create with a view helper just gets that authenticity token by default. You don't have to worry about it. The form width will also do some other things that will help it render visually different to the user. The other thing that I will say about the form is that right now it's going to feel like you're building the same thing. So like if I look over here, I built like a label and a text field and a submit button with my view helpers. Well, I still had to do that with the raw HTML. Like I still had to make an input. I still had to make this input. I would say the view helper version, if I go over here, is a little bit cleaner syntax. So I think syntactically, it's just easier to write. It's easier to remember. To me, form.textFieldName is a lot easier to remember than text area name, task description, and then close the text area. I just feel like the view helper syntax is a lot easier to remember. And then the third thing is that this code, if I go back over to my view helper version, this is going to be a lot more reusable. We haven't gotten into that yet, but eventually later in class, we will get to a version of these forms where you can reuse the same form over and over again. So I'd say those are all the benefits of using the view helper version, which is deals with the authenticity token for you. Syntax is a lot nicer, and it's going to be more reusable. Mark?
I was curious, how come it seems like it's in like an enumerable?
Yeah, I think what you're picking up on is that it has this do block right here. I would say that it's not so much, yeah, it looks like an enumerable because it takes a block. Why does it take a block? Well, a block is what we use in Ruby to create a chunk of code. So we can use a single line of code to execute something, but if we want to group code several lines into one piece of functionality, such as creating a form, we typically do that with a block. So that's why it looks like an enumerable, is because it takes a block. And why does it take a block? Well, because all of these pieces of code go together. They all are grouped together inside this block. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Jen?
Where you have it, where it says local true, is that at all related to when you're working on like localhost versus Heroku, for example? Or is it totally?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you've got it. And just to demonstrate that, let's so I'm going to close out my task manager Rails server now. I'm going to try to. There we go. So that I can now run my setlist Rails server. So task manager was version 1 that we did. Setlist is now like, did I say I'm going to run my task manager? I meant I'm going to run setlist. Setlist is kind of like version 2 of all of this. So version 2 is with this form. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. So now if I go to localhost 3000 artist new, I'm going to get my migrations are pending error. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to nuke it. So I have an alias for RailsDB drop, create, and migrate. There we go. Okay, so this is what my my form looks like over here. And I'm sorry, Jen, I lost your question. Oh yeah, local true. So I can go and use this form, like create a new artist, like we can create Prince, and we can try and create another artist, like Talking Heads. There we go. So that's how the form works. If I take out this local true option, and I do this again, I don't think I needed to rerun the Rails server there, just so y'all know. Let's refresh, click new artist, and let's try this again on the band. Notice how I click create artist and it like kind of stays on the same page. But then if I go to /artists, I'll actually see my new artists were created. So every time I click that button, it created the artist, but the redirect didn't work. So yes, the local true option really just makes it so that these forms work on localhost. For whatever reason, they don't work in your development environment unless you have that local true option. So I would just recommend putting this on all of your forms, all of your forms you make with form width. So as we've been saying, these forms generate HTML for us, or really all of our view helpers generate HTML for us. We prefer to use the view helper version. And let's go back over here and let's look at that form in our Chrome developer tools. So this is something, as I mentioned before, you want to be doing this very frequently. Whenever you're touching visual elements, you want to get your human eyes on them, see what they look like, and see what HTML they're generated. And in here, we can see a very similar form generated. It's got these actions, it's got these methods, and we can see our hidden authenticity token input was just taken care of for us. We didn't need to do anything special for that. Susie?
Yeah, when you make the method in this form to patch instead of post, is that method in your developer tool supposed to read as patch? I noticed yesterday when we were poking around that it came up as a hidden element or like a hidden type, but I didn't know if that was like my thing. My patch route is also not working, so I wasn't sure if it was like something wrong with the way I'm writing it, or if that's a normal thing.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. If I go back to my index here, and are these supposed to be, oh, edit prints. Okay, so I can click these edit buttons here. And so this is going to take me to my edit form, which is slightly different than my new form. If I go over to edit.html ERB, I can see the URL is slightly different. It is no longer /artist. It's this specific artist path. So we're including that artist ID. And then we've also included method patch here. If we look at the HTML that's rendered, we can see that this form still has a method of post, but it has this hidden attribute named with the name of _ method and the value of patch. So this is what you should expect to see when you're making a patch form. Richard brought this up earlier, but our forms really only take two verbs. They are post and get. So this is kind of a way of faking a patch request. This is how Rails is going to implement this. Does that answer your question, Susie?
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Lee?
Just kind of going back to what you said there, the forms only really take two verbs. Is that what you and Jameson were referring to when you talked about the form doesn't actually, it like does some workaround for delete or destroy? I don't know if you remember that part in the video, but is that what you're referring to?
Correct, yes. This is going to be the workaround for all your delete requests, all your patch requests, all of your put requests. Yeah.
Okay, may I ask one more question around there?
Absolutely.
So when you were saying that in the video, I was taking that as it doesn't ever actually delete, but it does. It just needs to do this workaround in order to make that happen. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Yep. And the actual delete, the actual functionality. So keep in mind all of this. The way I would think about this form submission is to relate back to that analogy. Did Jameson do the like postal system analogy for how the web works? Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So what I want you to imagine when you like click this form button is that's like the letters being written. The letters being written saying what we want to happen, but nothing actually happens until that letter is delivered and your pen pal receives it and can act on it. So to take that analogy a little bit further, it's when you click this button, the request is sent, but nothing actually happens until it is routed and we process it in the controller action. So I would say if I go to this controller, these lines in the controller are what actually affect change in the database. So here is where the artist is actually destroyed. It's actually right there on line 26.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So just to say that one more time, if I went over here and typed in something here, so I want to change this artist to talking legs, heads opposite of legs, right? Once I click that submit button, the HTTP request that says we want to update the artist is created, but the artist is not actually updated until it is one, routed through this route, and then two, that update action runs and this line of code runs to update the artist in the database. Very good point, Lee. Yeah, any other questions right now? So just to summarize some of what I've talked about here, we do want to use view helpers to create HTML for us. Form with is one of those very important view helpers that, that you need to be using. So if up until this point you have been using HTML forms in your code, that's something we can talk about during project check-ins. But what I would want you to do moving forward is to use these view helpers. So you don't necessarily need to go back and undo any of those raw HTML forms, but at least once in your project, in this current project, you should create a form with form with. Joe?
And so then when we're defining what we want that actual field to be, that's like the form dot, so it's saying to make a label, or the form dot text field, correct? Like that's what's saying make it this kind of form. That's like the input type.
Yeah, I'd say this is what says make it this type of input. So form.text field says create a text input. So if I go back over to my view, that's what creates this box right here.
And so if we wanted like a radio button, would it be like form dot, or not button, but form dot radio?
Maybe something similar. I would say you would have to look at you would have to look up your documentation to that. So let's try it together. So Rails create radio button for creating radio buttons. I think API doc. So API doc will be the technical documentation for you. It's not going to be tutorial format, but this is what it would look like. Radio button. We could also go to, yeah, so you see how this is under action view helpers form helper. What that tells me is that I should be able to call it on my form builder object like this. So I should be able to say form dot radio field, radio button. But yeah, I would have to look up a specific example for that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So that's a good segue to talk about some of this part of the lesson plan. So this is at the top of the lesson plan, and this is just like a brief intro into forms. So forms are used to collect user input. I think we've been seeing that so far with like typing in our names. As Joe is kind of hinting at, there's other types of inputs that we can have besides just these text fields. So we can have text fields. We can also have number fields where you can only put in a number. Any drop down is referred to as a select field. Yeah, any checkboxes, that's another data type, and then a radio button is the final type. So a checkbox is a multiple select field where you can just check any box that applies, and a radio button is usually a multiple choice. So you have 4 choices, pick one of these things. So as we've talked about here, the form is going to have a submit button. Once that submit button is clicked, that is what actually generates the HTTP request. That request is sent to our server. Our server then processes that request like it would do any other request. That request is going to have a verb and a path, and it's also going to have a body. So this is not critical information, but right now I do want you to hear this, that the body is another part of our HTTP request. So the verb and the path indicate what resource we're affecting and what we're trying to do to it. So for instance, post to /artist, we're creating an artist. Patch to /artist/ID, we're updating an artist. The actual information that we're trying to add or update is contained in the body. So if we're trying to create a new task, the body would contain the new task attributes. If we're trying to update a task, it would contain the updated attributes that we want to change. Only certain requests typically include a body, and those would be your post or your patch or your put requests. So if you just have a get request that indicates you're trying to view something, you typically don't need a body because you don't need to send any information. I use the term view, but the CRUD would be the read. So if we're just trying to read some information, we don't need to say, I'm trying to read, and here's a new title for this artist. We don't need to send any additional information. So typically a get or a delete doesn't have a body. A delete just says, this is the resource I want to destroy. We don't need to send any additional information. So types of requests that include a body, typically your post and your patch put. Any questions up to this point? All right, and the last thing I wanted to talk to you all about is query params. So Jameson, you all talked about it in the last section. We were able to identify that query params are part of the URL and they come after a question mark. So we can use query params in our application by just adding in a question mark to our URLs. So typically we use query params to send in additional information, usually information that is not, that is more for a visual or maybe like controlling what the user is seeing, but we don't typically use query params to send over critical information. So for instance, critical information such as if I'm creating an artist, what the artist name is. That information is contained in the body of the request, not in the query params. So name equals Prince. We would typically want to avoid sending over a request like this. Natia?
So is there like a benefit in passing parameters in like that versus like, I don't know how to describe this, but when you like pass in custom parameters with a link or something?
Passing custom. So what you might be referring to is if I go to my artist index right here, I have this link to new artists, and then I have the path of /artist/new, and I could create a key value here like name Brian. Is this kind of the syntax that you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm basically guessing, can you like take that same thing, put a question mark on the end of new and put Brian and do something with that? Or would you do it the way you see it there?
Yeah, so let's just see what this does. So I'm trying to create a link here. I've added in this key value pair. Let's see what that looks like. So back on I did that on my artist index. I see my new artist button right here, and I'll go ahead and click it. That actually didn't do anything. So let me use my, my selector here to look at this link. And it looks like it added that as an attribute here. That's actually not what I was expecting. So let me do what Natia is doing and say, add in my query param. So the answer is yes. Any path that you put into an HTML element, so for instance, like a link, I could just put in the query param directly in here. Maybe a better example is something like sort equals by name or something. So a sorting control is a very common use case for a query param. So now if I go back over to my view and refresh and click this button, now I can see that query param popping up in my URL here. Natia.
Okay, so actually I'll just drop in, since you're kind of speaking to it, I put in the chat what I was doing, and I'm wondering if what you just showed us is better than what I was doing.
Gotcha.
And if so, why? And that does put it
Gotcha.
in like the parameters that you can pick up and use.
Yeah, so I would say what you're doing in the chat, what I see is a link to, and then you're using licenses path. I would say that would be preferred because it's using our path helper, which we do want to use path helpers, but we also haven't talked about path helpers yet this mod. So I would say if you feel like you understand path helpers and you want to use them, I'm okay with that, but that's not something that we have talked about yet. We'll talk about that more in I think that's also in advanced routing as well. So there's no expectation for you all to use that. So now that I've added in a query param, what does that actually do? Well, this is taking us to our artist new page. So let's go ahead and put a pry into that controller under artist new. Let's click refresh and I'll see my spinning wheel up here. So it looks like I'm stuck in my pry. Go over here. And what that query param is going to affect is it's going to affect my params hash. So if I type in params, I can see that query param coming over. So in the video, something that we talked about was that the params hash is kind of like this bucket. It just aggregates data from a lot of different places. So my query params are going to pop up in this params hash. All of my form data is also going to pop up in the params hash as well. So if I put another pry into create, and I exit out of this pry, and I go over to my form and I fill it out. So this name attribute that I just filled out, if I type in params, I see that coming over right here as name equals Brian. And I can also see my authenticity token come over, and I can see a couple other things come over in my params as well. So the params hash, very, very important for passing data throughout your application. The params hash aggregates data coming in from multiple locations. I'm going to stop my share briefly here and just double check my notes. Yeah, so I think that's everything that that I really wanted to cover. What I'd like to do is I'd like to just take the last 30 minutes here to kind of do maybe some impromptu office hours. So I'll kind of let you all continue to drive the conversation. Yeah, so let's get into it. Molly, you've got a question.
Yeah, wondering if you could give some examples of like, because I can see like you could do a lot of things that way, but like it sounds like with RESTful routes, like you wouldn't necessarily want to do that in like a link from a show page or something like that. But can you give some examples of like situations where you would want to use query params to just like for a display versus like not a good idea or not conventional?
Yeah, so I think the not a good idea versions would be to do that rather than making a post or a put or a patch request. So let me actually show you if I share again. Let me exit out of this pry. I'm going to take these pries out. Take these pries out. Go back over here, click new artist. So I could actually go in here and edit this. So that's kind of powerful with the dev tools. I can actually just change this to a GET request pretty easily and try to submit this. So let's say main, let's say prints. We're trying to create prints again. And notice when I click that button, let's actually do that again. We'll change this to a GET request. So notice that me changing it over here in the view did not permanently change this form. It's just changing it for me, what I'm seeing right now. Let's create a brand new artist. Molly, can you give me, I'm gonna, I don't want to do floggy Molly. That's not a good one. Molly, can you give me another artist?
Muse.
Thank you. Okay, so notice that Muse was not actually created here. I don't see Muse, but if I look at my address bar up here, holy moly, I get so many query params. So all of that form data that I was trying to pass over, a GET, if you do your form as a GET, all of that data is just going to go into the query param. So I see UTF-8, I see the authenticity token coming through. Can I scroll? I can't scroll in this address bar very easily, but I should see my name field coming in as well. There it is, name use right there. So this would be the not good example. So we don't want our forms to submit GET requests. Again, that's not very RESTful because a GET request indicates that we're trying to read something. If we're submitting a form, we're probably sending some data over for a create or an update, most likely. So this is not a good example. Yeah, a better example would be, I think sorting controls are a pretty common one. Let me actually go to your project and see. I think there's probably a good example in there as well. Probably towards the extensions. Yeah, I think this first one is a perfect example. So sort parents by number of children. So when I visit the parents index page, I see a link to sort the parents by the number of child table name they have. So in that link, I might send over a query param that says, I want this page sorted some sort of like string identifier to say sort this page by the number of children. And so then I could use that param in my controller to say, if this param is present, maybe rather than showing artist.all, I could say actually show the artists in this sorted format. Does that help, Molly?
Yeah, and you would just use logic in your controller then to determine like if the param's present or not. Okay, yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Noah.
I am curious how to get, when editing a form, to get the previous information to pre-fill in there. Looked into it a little bit, but I don't really understand it.
Yeah, that's a good question. Is that part of the project?
I haven't seen it yet. I don't think it is.
Yeah, so I think that's, yeah, so I'm glad that that's not part of this project. It's not like super critical. But yes, usually when you view a form and you're editing something, usually it's pre-populated with the current attributes. So that's a nice to have, not something that you need to have for this project, but I can show you a little bit how to do that. So I think the syntax, if I click on edit, yeah, so we want this to show up with this current artist name. So I think the way that I would do that is in my view, edit. I think I can pass another argument here for the default value. So I think I can put, if I just put like a string here, default value, and go and refresh my form. No method error, undefined method merge for default value.
You just have to define it as the value. So it's value : default value.
Ah, got it. Value as a keyword argument. Yes. So value is the current value of the form element, which we want to start off with. Yeah. So that's the syntax for creating a default value. So in this case, if I want this to be this current artist's name, I should be able to just say @artist.name. Go over here. There we go. So I can update talking legs to talking heads.
Awesome.
So if I click on the band, it's pre-populated with the band. Yep. So that's how you do it. And what I will say is when we get to binding models to forms, that's a separate class we'll have later down the road. That gets even easier. But this is how I would do it for right now. Alex?
Yeah, mine's gonna piggyback off Noah's question. What about stuff that the default value isn't a string, like the radio buttons?
That one is much harder to do.
Okay, so I should just accept that I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah. So with all of the radio button and select field inputs, I would say for right now, you don't have to be using those. You might have already chosen to use them. I think a very common use case is the Boolean attribute. So if you have a Boolean attribute, a checkbox makes a lot of sense. It's a very Boolean, like yes or no inputs. But if you are having trouble getting that to work, I would say just replace it with a text field with the expectation that the user types in true or false in there. And then you can do some logic in your controller with if statements, for example, to say, if this string is true, then set this attribute to true, something like that. So just to say that one more time, checkboxes and select fields, we don't necessarily require that you all know how to use those. You can get by with a text field in most cases. It might not be as pretty, but that's okay. For right now, as backend developers, really trying to emphasize the concepts of REST, of CRUD, and not as concerned with the visual elements. Susie?
Yeah, just following off of that, like for those values, would you test for those at all, or is it okay not to?
It's okay not to. That would be like some pretty advanced testing, but you certainly can test them. And the way that you would have to do that is with CSS selectors. So if I go to Google CSS selectors on my W3 reference, this is how I can select an element on a page. So I can use .class to get an element with a class. I can use element.class to get a particular element. So I'll circle back to this in just a second. Let me refresh my page here. And this is the way that I kind of think about it. Well, if I'm trying to test that the band is here in this field, how does that show up in the HTML? Well, the input has a value of the band. So what I need to do is I need to make a CSS selector to say, look for an input element with the value of the band. Maybe say that one more time. Look for an input element with an attribute of value that equals the band. So looking at my CSS selector reference, I would want this syntax right here, which says attribute equals value. So selects all elements with this attribute. So in testing, what that might look like is maybe spec features, artists. Let's actually try this. It pre-populates with the current values. So I'll create an artist, visit this artist page, and then I would, what I want to do is I want my capybara to find me an element, and I want an input element with an attribute of value that equals capital PRINC. And let's see how far that gets me. So run rspec, spec features artist edit spec, and this starts on line 39. And so I get unable to find CSS input value equals prink. So now let's go over to my form. And I would think that that would work. So maybe I can do a save and open page here. And see what it looks like visually. That's why. It's because I haven't actually clicked this edit button yet. It looks like I'm not on the actual form page yet. Okay, so rather than visiting /artists, I think I just want to go straight to that artist edit page. So maybe /artist/ and then artist.id/edit. And what you can see me doing here is I don't need to go look for the routes file to see what this route is. Based on RESTful routes, this is what this route should be. So now let's run this and see what that save and open page looks like. Cool, I can see it's pre-populated. So this save and open page is looking a little better. Looks like I didn't get an error anymore. So I think that's all I need for my test. Because if this page can't find this element, then it should throw an error. So I run this test and it passes. So if I take out value, if I take out this default value from this form, this test should fail. And sure enough, it does. Yeah, so that's how I would test it. I use page.find to find an element based on a CSS selector. And if it finds the element with this default value filled in, then it's good to go. And I think what this really illustrates for me, or why I really want to go through this example, is because I'm really relying on my knowledge of HTML and CSS. So I need to know, if I want a default value to appear, what HTML and CSS do I expect to see? Well, I'm actually looking for an input element with this attribute of value, which equals PRINC in this case. So knowing the HTML and using your view helpers and your Chrome developer tools to look at your HTML, very important part of your workflow.
Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Mark.
That page.find, I guess that's another way of testing, because I guess typically we use like expect or something. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And that's something that we will, if I go over to my calendar here, let me just go straight to the backend calendar for mod 2. On Thursday, while you are doing your project eval, you're going to have an exploration on HTML, CSS, and testing best practices, and it will cover that page.find. It'll also cover within blocks and some other stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, what other questions do you have? Caleb?
Hey there. This isn't very much a forms question, so I could totally ask this some other time. Or is that okay to ask now?
Let me check in with Kevin. Kevin, do you have a forms question?
Yeah, I hadn't used that page.find before. Is that better to use than the normal expect page to have content with that pre-populated value in this case?
Yeah, so page to have content. Yeah, let me actually just show you. I kind of skipped over what you might do as an initial reaction. So your initial reaction might be, okay, well, if I'm trying to test that this input has this value in it, I should be able to just say over here, expect page to have content of artist.name. I want to make sure that that artist name appears on this page. Okay, cool. So let's run this test. And it actually doesn't work. It actually just says expected to find this text on this page. So really what's going on here is that Capybara doesn't see this as part of the text on the page. The reason is that when you say expect page to have content, Capybara is only looking at the content that's in between the HTML tags. So for instance, see how this label, there's an open label and there's a closing label, and name is kind of like right in between the two. That is what it means by content on the page. Versus this default value is not inside one of these tags. It's actually an attribute on the tag itself. Notice that value equals prink, is part of this input element. It's not part of the content in between the tags.
Oh, wow, that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's some of the subtleties of how Capybara works. Other forms questions? Caleb, let's go to your question.
Awesome. This could have been a question that you have already answered, and if so, I apologize for requesting that you repeat yourself. But in the videos, the functionality is created via the controllers, and in that you have your create, you have your edit/update, and you also have your delete. Why are those there? I can understand arguments for create being there and perhaps delete, but why is edit not in your model instead?
Let me go to the code and pull up this artist controller. So are you talking about this edit action?
My apologies. I'm actually referencing the update action, because it feels like that is manipulation of code and to my understanding, or manipulation of data. And if we're manipulating the data, it should be in the models, but.
Yes, yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so when we say any logic that affects the database, such as reading from the database, updating in the database, destroying, basically all of your CRUD actions, any of that should be contained in the model. What we don't mean is that that code or that logic needs to be called from the model. So distinction between where we define the logic and where we call the logic. So I would say right here, we're not defining any logic for updating this artist in the database. That logic is built into Active Record. So we're not defining anything new here. We're actually just using that method. So the controller's job is the controller's logic responsibilities is to behave as the traffic cop or the CEO or the, we say it contains business logic. That to me is all different ways of saying the controller controls things. The controller decides when things should happen. So this right here is not the controller defining the logic. This is the controller just saying, now is the time when this should happen. Does that clear that up, Caleb?
It does. Thank you so much. And we're getting that method via inheritance. We're getting that, correct?
Correct, yes. So I would say that if I open up my artist model on the side, we have defined the logic in the model just with this inheriting from application.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome. Another good example is find. So if we go to the index action or .all, notice that there would be no point in here coming here and making a method like def get all, and then it calls artist.all. You're kind of just making extra work for yourself. Like, yeah, we would be defining the logic, but at some point we still have to call the logic outside of the model. So key distinction between defining and calling. Susie.
Yeah, to jump off of that too. So in the, like, let's say in this case, right, you were going to order your artist by like alphabetical order. Does that then, that particular logic of like ordering it, does that live in the model itself or in the controller? Even,
Yeah.
or, yeah, okay.
So I would say, just as an example, if I changed it to this, so if I changed, I think this is what your project asked for. It asked you to, on the index page, order by created at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it says mostly recently created first. So I think that would be more like this, descending. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the point where I start to say like, it's like, is this kind of too much logic in the controller? We could go over here and say like by created at and move this logic over here. And this would need to be a class methods for reasons I'll talk about later this week. And then we could call it over here, something like this. So this would be me moving this logic over to the model. You could make the argument, like I just said, that it would be okay to have this line of code in the controller because we're not really like defining any custom logic. We're kind of just using a built-in method. I can definitely see that argument. Where I would say that starts to break down is as soon as you chain on a second method. So I think as soon as you chain on a second method, that's kind of my rule of thumb of that should be a model method. So if I say it needs to be ordered by created at, and we only want artists where, or maybe we only want 5 on a page or something like this. As soon as you start to chain multiple methods, that to me is too much of this logic, this database logic.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
You're welcome. I would say for this project, and the first time you do it, I would want you all to go through this process of creating a model method to handle this ordering on the index page. And maybe later down the road, you can start to make some more design decisions for yourself. But for now, we really want you to get into that practice of anytime there's logic, database logic, put that in your model. And we'll do some, this concept is like so important. We're going to do some code review of this during the next project just on MVC. Natia?
So similar question. Would you ever do any CRUD activity in the model?
If it was just a pure CRUD action, like create this thing, delete this thing, I probably wouldn't make another model method. But where it gets complex, and this will come up in the next project, is what if your update needs to cascade updates? So for instance, if I I don't know, maybe let's say anytime an artist is updated, we also need to reset all the play counts on all their songs. So maybe we would do something like def, like update name. I don't know, maybe we need some custom logic to say, okay, if we're updating and maybe it accepts a new name. So maybe we could say update your name to this new name. And then also look at all of your songs. And then for each one of those songs, we need to reset that song's play count to 0 for whatever reason. Just kind of trying to make something up here. So then we'll update all of those songs play counts to 0, something like that. So this is an example, Nitia, of CRUD logic living in the model. This is custom CRUD logic, I would say. This is not a normal update. This is a advanced update where we've got some extra requirements of, if I'm updating something, maybe I also need to update all of my children's somethings.
So in the realm that we're living in, if we wanted to, for a parent, find all the babies and destroy them all that were related, would we be doing that inside of the model, or would we be doing like the deletion portion in the controller and the finding portion in the model?
I would say you should be doing the deletion in the model. Okay. And I will say you don't necessarily need to make a new method for that. You can, on your has many associations, you can add in an option called dependent destroy. And this will make it so that if the artist, in this case, if the artist is deleted, all of their songs are deleted as well. So that's something that you might find helpful. Dependent destroy. In fact, this is a very common thing to put on your has many associations. All right, what else y'all got? Regina?
For that same thing, I didn't add it in, but I saw that when you create a foreign key, you can add, I think after it, cascade delete. Is that the same thing as doing that? Are those the same thing?
Yes, they should do the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yep. So what that might look like is in my migration, when I add these together, I think it's something like this. Something like that. I don't know the exact syntax, but it would do the same thing. Yes. These are all different ways of saying if you have a children records, when you are deleted, your children should be deleted as well.
I have a follow-up question to that. Let's say you create a migration with like, oh, let's say you have your migration already made for your foreign key. Do you have, but let's say you were wanting to add that to it, but hypothetically you didn't know this other way existed. Would you have to delete your foreign key and do a new migration to add that to your foreign key?
That's how I would do it. Yes, I would make a migration. Whoops. I would make a migration to remove the foreign key and re-add it with the proper syntax that I want.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, everybody. I think that is going to do it for this morning, unless there are any other last minute questions. Jameson, can you, Jameson G, can you go try to sign up for a project eval now, or check in now and let me know if you see there should be one available time slot.
Check it out.
And Nitia.
Yeah, I'm gonna use all the time we have. Is there any chance you could walk us through the query parameter thing again?
Definitely. Yeah.
And
I think this will
specifically
be,
what I want to do is I want to click a button, and when I click the button, I want like a custom parameter to go with my button.
yeah, let's do it. So we did a, I think we did a link last time, so we can do a button this time. Let me take out some of the stuff that I've done in my model. Yep. And let me take out this part of the migration, close some of this stuff out. So let's just do some dream driving here. Let's say we want on our songs index, let's just make a button here. Yeah, let's just make a button here. So I'll use my view helper for button 2 to create my button for me. This will be, I don't know, we'll just call this button send query params. We'll make the path go back to this same route. So we're on the songs index. So let's make it go back to /songs. And let's see what that does. Let me run my server. Go to localhost 3000 /songs. And I'll see my button here. So that's looking good. And if I click on it, yeah. So by default, a button is going to post. So because I had it go to /songs, it's trying to post to /songs. So I think what I want to do instead is I actually want to make this a get method. So I want to say method get. And let's click that button again. Nice. Okay. So essentially, every time I click this button, it sends a get request to /songs, which is the page that it's already on. So this is essentially just taking me back to the same page.
And if you wanted that to take inside a parameter that you had built into your form in the form of like a text field, how would you say like that text field value put in my parameters?
Well, if I'm going to say that text field value put into my parameters, it wouldn't necessarily come across as query params, but that's exactly what these text fields do in our forms. So these form text fields creates an input that sends over this name parameter that I can access in my params hash.
Okay, so things like, for example, filtering the index page, not going to happen without a post form, right? Like that's the correct way to do it.
No, I would say, so your description of like, when you said text field, I very much imagined like a form with a field that I could input. But when I'm just trying to sort a page, I don't really need a text field. I don't need the user to send me any information. I just need them to click this button. So I might do that like this. I might say, let's try this.
I am actually talking about a user input. So like, you know, the numerical filter you have in the project?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah, so that I wouldn't make a button to, I would make that a form.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Just to kind of complete this, I could say here like per page equals 5, I don't know. And maybe this text is, oops, sorry, I'm doing this in the wrong place. Say limit this to 5 songs. And then this sends over a query param of limit equals 5. So now if I refresh this page and I click this button, refresh this page and click this button. Is my button updating? Oops, not view page source. That's not what I wanted to do. Inspect. Go over to this button. Yeah, it seems like it's got the correct action. Okay, well, if I go over to my controller, songs controller, and I pry in here, click that button one more time. I'm pried in here, look at my params, and I don't see my query param coming over. Interesting. I don't know why that's not working.
Do you only have 2 songs?
So what I'm trying to see is I'm trying to see this limit equals 5 parameter come over. Can't quite figure that out. It is past noon though, so I don't think this is super critical for me to figure out. So I'll go ahead and wrap that up here. Thank you all very much for your engagement and your participation and all of your questions as always. We've got those project check-ins this afternoon and going into tomorrow as well. So yeah, we'll see you all for project check-ins. And if we don't see you this afternoon, we'll see you for class tomorrow morning. Thank y'all.
Thanks.